and indeed to Pushkin House. Last Saturday was the 221st anniversary of the birth of Alexander Pushkin. We thought that a fitting way to mark Pushkin's birthday this year would be by having a poetry reading in celebration of the Boldinger autumn. I'm delighted that Lucy Daniels, Anthony Wood, and Ala Gerig, our Russian reader, are able to join me in reading some of the wonderful poetry Pushkin wrote during his time at Boldinger in the autumn of 1830. I'd like to say a few words by way of introduction. On Easter Sunday, the 5th of April, 1830, Alexander Pushkin, for the second time, made a formal proposal for the hand of the 18-year-old Natalia Goncharova. This is the well-known portrait of Natalia Goncharova by Karl Brulov. And here is a sketch or a drawing of Natalia by Pushkin. Pushkin had proposed to Natalia a year earlier. This first proposal hadn't been rejected outright. He had been told on that occasion that Natalie was still too young. This time, Natalia's mother accepted his proposal for her daughter's hand. Upon Alexander's engagement, his father transferred to him part of the Pushkin family's ancestral lands, along with 200 serf families. The poet was now a country squire in his own right and had to visit his estate to deal with all the formalities of taking over his new property. On the 31st of August, 1830, Pushkin left Moscow for the village of Boldinger. He traveled 500 miles to the east, only stopping to change horses. He reached his family seat on the 3rd of September, 1830. This is a picture of the main building on the Boldinger estate, and this is an autumn view showing the lake. The Boldinger estate in the Nizhny Novgorod province had been associated with the Pushkin family since the end of the 16th century and had finally been given to the poet's ancestor, Fyodor Pushkin, by Tsar Mikhail I during the time of troubles. This was for the services he had rendered during the recapture of Moscow from the Poles in 1612. Pushkin never intended to stay in Boldinger for very long, but fate decreed otherwise. At that time, a cholera epidemic had just broken out in Russia, and many provinces were put under quarantine. As a result, Pushkin remained stranded in Boldinger for 3 months. Those 3 autumn months brought forth several dozen incredible masterpieces in both verse and prose. The 2 words, Boldinger autumn, Болдинская осень, have since become a set phrase in Russian that is used to describe a superhuman flight of inspiration. Pushkin came to Boldinger full of foreboding and anguish. He was about to say goodbye to his merry bachelor's life. His fiancée had been left behind in cholera-besieged Moscow. Her mother kept putting financial demands on him. The Goncharovs were an impoverished family, and he was having to marry Natalie without any dowry. Not only that, on the insistence of Natalie's mother, he had to pay for her dowry. And so in Boldinger, he had to get his own financial affairs in order. The picture you can now see is a drawing by Pushkin of his future mother-in-law from that time. He regarded Natalia's mother as a serious obstacle and titled the drawing Maminka Kars, Mother Kars, comparing her to the unassailable Turkish fortress at Kars. Because of all these enormous pressures, Pushkin was experiencing a host of different thoughts and feelings. Yearning for his fiancée, boredom and irritation with the worldly chores he was having to perform, thoughts about both the past and the present, and philosophical contemplations on the meaning of this life. All of this found expression in verse. The haunting poem Demons, Biesi, which we will read as our first poem, was written on the 7th of September 1830, 4 days after his arrival, and embodied in melodious words the author's nightmarish visions. The next day, 8th September 1830, Pushkin wrote Elegia, one of his greatest achievements. It was the poetic confession of his innermost hopes. I wish to live, to suffer, and to think. The mind's creation will not cease to wring warm tears from me. Pushkin struggled with fate throughout the whole of his life. Elegy reflects his readiness to withstand any blows that fate would deal to him. I know that griefs and cares will burden me, but pleasures also life will surely bring. We will read Elegy as our final poem. The theme of fate underlies everything Pushkin wrote in Boldinska that autumn. In the poem written on a sleepless night, he asks fate, "What is it you want from me? I want to understand you. I'm seeking sense in you." Having poured out his cherished thoughts in these first few poems, Pushkin started appreciating his environment. In a letter to Pyotr Pletnyov, his publisher and friend, he wrote as follows: "These parts are a sheer delight. Plains stretching out on all sides, no neighbors anywhere around. I am free to ride about the countryside or sit writing at home to my heart's content." He was writing in never to be surpassed ecstasy. In another letter to Pletnyov, Pushkin stated with justified pride, "It's been a long time since I have been as productive as I am now at Boldinska." Indeed, it was the most productive period of his entire life. In Boldinska, he wrote what he first intended as the 3 concluding chapters of Eugene Onegin, the 8th, 9th, and 10th. However, he knew only too well that the original chapter 10, which was to tell of Onegin's involvement with the Decembrist rebels, couldn't be published. So he enciphered the beginning of this chapter, and on the 19th of October, the sacred anniversary of the opening of his alma mater, the lycée at Tsarskoye Selo, he burnt chapter 10. The first part of this chapter, the bit he had enciphered, was only deciphered in the 20th century. The original chapter 8 became excerpts or fragments from Onegin's journey and appeared as an appendix to the main work. And the original chapter 9 became the 8th and last chapter of his great novel in verse. The finishing of Eugene Onegin, a part that is from Tatyana's letter, which Pushkin added later, symbolized the whole previous period of the poet's creative work. And he celebrated the finishing of his 7 years, 4 months, and 17 days work on Eugene Onegin by writing the poem Trud, which will be read this evening in Vladimir Nabokov's translation as the work. We will, of course, also be reading it in Russian. The number and quality of works Pushkin produced in Boldina are astonishing. Apart from the concluding chapters of Onegin, he wrote or completed over 30 short poems, the comic narrative poem, The Little House in Kolomna, a satirical essay, The History of the Goruchina Village. This is a parody of the Russian people, of a history of the Russian people by Nikolai Polivoy, The Fairy Tale of a Priest and His Handyman Balda, The Fairy Tale of a She-Bear, as well as a number of critical articles and letters. But the towering achievement of his Boldina Autumn was the writing or completion of the 4 short dramatic scenes in blank verse, which Pushkin called the Little Tragedies. The Miserly Knight, Mozart and Salieri, The Stone Guest, and finally, The Feast During the Plague. He also wrote 5 novellas or short stories known as the Tales of Bielkin, Povesti Bielkina. The Little Tragedies and Tales of Bielkin were completely new genres for Pushkin. And the Tales of Bielkin became a landmark in Russian literature. Tolstoy was to call them the finest prose ever written in the Russian language. The Little Tragedies and Tales of Bielkin heralded the beginning of a completely new period in Pushkin's writing and in Russian literature as a whole. However, I would like to underline one particular aspect of the Tales of Bielkin, which was noted for the first time by Anna Akhmatova. I've already mentioned that Pushkin struggled against fate throughout the whole of his life. Akhmatova writes how on the threshold of his new married life, he writes 5 short stories and tries to enchant fate by bringing all 5 novellas against all the odds to a happy ending. In Anna Akhmatova's words, the happy endings in the Tales of Bielkin were a bizarre bewitching of destiny, through which Pushkin prompted fate to save him, showing fate that there are no hopeless situations and that happiness, in spite of all the odds, is attainable. Among the short poems written in Boldina, there are 3 where the poet says farewell to 2 women he had loved during the time he had spent in Odessa in 1823 and 1824. One of them was Elizaveta Vorontsova, whose portrait you can now see. To her, Pushkin addressed the poem Farewell, Proshania. This is a portrait of Amalia Riznich, who had to part from Pushkin and leave Odessa for Italy with her merchant husband. She died there shortly afterwards. Pushkin addressed to her the poems Invocation, Zaklinania, and Bound for Your Distant Homeland, Для берегов Отчизны Дальной. We will be reading the second of those 2 poems. Now, a brief word about the poet's daily routine. The poet broke off from his work only for meals and strolls on foot or horseback in the surrounding steppeland. As Pushkin himself said, step after step, of neighbors not a soul, ride as much as you like. And as he also put it, I wake up at 7 o'clock, drink coffee, and lie in bed till 3 o'clock. I have been writing a lot recently and have already written a heap of things. At 3 o'clock, I go riding. At 5, I take a bath, and then dine on potatoes and buckwheat porridge. Then I read till 9 o'clock. This picture shows Pushkin, after his early morning coffee, working while reclining in bed, his preferred method of writing. And this picture shows Pushkin riding in the surrounding countryside, which he would do until dusk. As he put it, he was searching in the universe for melodious rhymes for his poetry. The house on the estate was pretty run down. None of the Pushkin family had lived there for several generations. But as soon as he crossed the creaking threshold to go outside, the poet found himself in a gorgeous park, which stretched to the horizon. Crossing it was an avenue of linden trees with a garden seat at the end. He spent hours sitting there, his gaze wandering over the stepland vistas that opened up before him. Pushkin had brought with him to Boldinger an English volume, the poetical works of Milman, Bowles, Wilson, and Barry Cornwall, which had been published in the original English in Paris. The poet had obtained this book in 1829, and it was one of his favorite books. His interest had been attracted by the dramatic scenes written by Barry Cornwall. This was the pen name of Brian Proctor, a verse-writing solicitor who moved in literary circles. As Anthony Wood has explained in the introduction to his translation of The Little Tragedies, Cornwall's dramatic scenes in blank verse presented climaxes without exposition or development, reveling in the heightened emotional moment and the grand speech. This gave Pushkin the idea of how dramatic subjects might be treated in blank verse. In Boldinger, Pushkin was prompted by Barry Cornwall's poems on similar subjects to write I Am Here in Azilia, which we're going to read, and from Barry Cornwall, Here's a Health to Thee, Mary, Piu za zdravie, Mary. That autumn, Pushkin realized his intention of writing his own dramatic scenes or little tragedies. As already mentioned, Pushkin indeed titled these pieces The Little Tragedies. All four of them have an autobiographical connection. The Miserly Knight echoes the miserly treatment of the poet by his father. In The Stone Guest, Don Juan's illicit arrival in Madrid reminds us of Pushkin's attempt 5 years earlier to ride illicitly to St. Petersburg from his Mikhailovskaya exile. He had turned back because of two bad omens that he had witnessed on the way. First, he had met a priest, and then a hare had crossed his path. It was only because of these omens that he had never made it to St. Petersburg, and so wasn't in the capital on the 14th of December, 1825, the day of the Decembrists' uprising. Mozart and Salieri was based on the widespread rumor that the diligent but mediocre composer Salieri had poisoned the unruly genius Mozart. In it, in Anthony Wood's words, Pushkin shows the impact of uncontrollable genius on common humanity. The piece also evokes the vicious treatment to which Pushkin's own works had been subjected by his contemporary critics. However, none of the little tragedies was as relevant to Pushkin's state of mind in Boldinger as the feast during the plague. This was because in the volume of English authors I just mentioned, Pushkin's imagination had been caught by the Scottish writer John Wilson's historical melodrama, The City of the Plague. This was due to the fact that Russia was now experiencing a similar situation with cholera raging all over the country. The Feast During the Plague is Pushkin's free translation of part of one scene from Wilson's work, which had originally been published in 1816. Pushkin takes on Wilson's setting, London during the Great Plague of 1666 and 1667, the characters being young naval officers of the English fleet home from the Dutch wars. One scene in Wilson's drama, with its penetrating psychological insight, came to the poet as a profound shock. This was a scene of drunken revelry around tables laden with food and drink in the street of a plague-infected London. Pushkin first translated Wilson's blank verse into Russian. He then converted it into a tragedy of his own, The Feast During the Plague, concentrating it into a single scene of carousal by desperate survivors of the Great Plague. The central characters are Walsingham, the master of the revels, and the priest. Their confrontation provides the dramatic action. As the literary scholar Yuri Lotman wrote, the master of the revels fights the plague by plunging into unrestrained freedom, and the priest fights it by appealing to moral responsibility. However, freedom and responsibility are two inseparable sides of the same coin, and The Feast During the Plague is the only play in the cycle where the struggle of the warring heroes ends not with the death of one of them, but with their moral reconciliation. In the three other plays of the cycle, the heroes, each driven by their obsession, either die, as in The Miserly Knight and Don Juan, or commit murder, as in the case of Salieri. The highlights of The Feast During the Plague are its two songs, Mary's Song and Walsingham's Hymn to the Plague, both of which we're going to read. As Anthony Wood has put it, the two original song lyrics with which Pushkin replaced Wilson's, and his judicious editing and pruning of his selected fragment, is a miraculous transformation of literary base metal into gold. Pushkin was able to return to Moscow only on the 5th of December, 1830. The 3-month Boldener autumn was open. After many more delays and quarrels with his future mother-in-law, he managed at last to marry Natalia Goncharova on the 18th of January, 1831. This is a drawing of the couple at the time of their marriage by E.A. Ustinov. In Pushkin's life, there were to be two more Boldener autumns, in 1833 and 1834. During the first of these, he wrote almost as many works as in 1830. Among them were the narrative poem, The Bronze Horseman, the prose tale, The Queen of Spades, his completion of the history of Pugachev, two fairy tales, and a number of short poems. At Boldener, in the autumn of the following year, 1834, Pushkin wrote only one work. This was the fairy tale of the Golden Cockerel. The Boldener autumn manuscripts are continuing to provide literary scholars with ample food for thought even today. Experts break lances in the interpretation of every line, every comma, and every spontaneous sketch in the margins that came from the pen of the son of Russian poetry. We're now going to read in translation and in the original 6 poems and 2 excerpts from The Feast During the Plague. All of these were written or completed by Pushkin during the Boldener autumn of 1830. In the tradition of the Pushkin Club, we will read the English translation first, then the Russian original. All the translations, with 2 exceptions, are by Anthony Wood. The 2 exceptions are The Work, which is a translation by Vladimir Nabokov, and Written on a Sleepless Night, which is my own translation. The last poem we're going to read is Elegy, Elegia. In this poem, Pushkin, during that bleak time when cholera was raging throughout Russia, declares, "But I have no desire, dear friends, to die. I wish to live, to suffer, and to think. Но не хочу, о други, умирать. Я жить хочу, чтоб мыслить и страдать." Lucy Daniels will now start our recital by reading Anthony's translation of Biesi.
Demons. Storm clouds hurry, storm clouds whirl, moon plays hide and seek. Faintly lights the flying snow, sky and night are bleak. On we go, and ding, ding, ding goes the little bell. Endless spaces frighten me more than I can tell. Hey there, driver, faster! Horses, sir, they're tired and slow. Besides, the blizzard's blinding me. No more roads, just snow. Strike me dead, we've lost the way. What are we to do? We're the playthings of some sprite. Round and round we go. There he is. Look, up he runs, blowing, spitting fiend, trying to tug a maddened horse down a deep ravine. Next, like some fantastic milepost at our side, he rears. Then he glimmers in the dark. Then he disappears. Storm clouds hurry, storm clouds whirl. Moon plays hide and seek, faintly lights the flying snow. Sky and night are bleak. No more strength to circle on, no more little bell. Now we've stopped. What's that out there? Stump? Wolf? Who can tell? Angry blizzard, weeping blizzard, horses sniff and snort. There he is now, far away, burning eyes cavort. Now the horses start afresh, ding, ding, ding again. See those spirits gathering on the wide white plain, numberless and hideous at their devilries. Moon-dim hordes of demons whirling like November leaves. What can all their wailing mean? Where are they being driven? Some nocturnal burial rite? Some witch bride being given? Storm clouds hurry, storm clouds whirl, moon plays hide and seek. Faintly lights the flying snow, sky and night are bleak. Demons, swarms and swarms of them, flying to a boundless height. Their unending, doleful moan tears and tears my heart.
Бесы. Бесы. Мчатся тучи, вьются тучи, невидимкою луна освещает снег летучий, мутно небо, ночь мутна. Еду, еду в чистом поле, колокольчик динь-динь-динь. Страшно, страшно поневоле средь неведомых равнин. Эй, пошел ямщик! Нет мочи, коням, барин, тяжело. Вьюга мне слепает очи, все дороги занесло. Хоть убей, следа не видно. Сбились мы, что делать нам? В поле бес нас водит, видно, да кружит по сторонам. Посмотри, вон-вон играет, дует, плюет на меня. А вот там во враг толкает одичалого коня. Там верстою небывалой он торчал передо мной. Там сверкнул он искрой малой и пропал во тьме пустой. Мчатся тучи, вьются тучи, невидимкою луна освещает снег летучий. Мутно небо, ночь мутна, сил нам нет кружиться доле. Колокольчик вдруг умолк. Кони встали, Что там в поле? Кто их знает, пень или волк? Вьюга злится, вьюга плачет, кони чуткие храпят. Вон уж он далече скачет, лишь глаза во тьме горят. Кони снова понеслись, колокольчик динь-динь-динь. Вижу, духи собрались средь белеющих равнин. Бесконечный, безобразный, в мутной месяце игре закружились бесы разные, будто листья в ноябре. Сколько их! Куда их гонят? Что так жалобно поют? Домового ли хоронят? Ведьму ль замуж выдают? Мчатся тучи, вьются тучи, невидимкою луна освещает снег летучий. Мутно небо, ночь мутна. Мчатся бесы, рой за роем, в беспредельной вышине, визгом жалобным и воем надрывая сердце мне.
Anthony, you're going to read the work now.
The work. Come is the moment I craved. My work of long years is completed. Why then this strange sense of woe, secretly harrowing me? Having my high task performed, do I stand as a useless day labourer stands, with his wages received, foreign to all other toil? Or am I sorry to part with my work, night's silent companion, golden Aurora's friend, friend of the household gods?
Труд. Миг вожделенный настал, окончен мой труд многолетний. Что ж непонятная грусть тайно тревожит меня? Или, свой подвиг свершив, я стою, как паденщик ненужный, плату приявший свою, чуждой работе другой? Или жаль мне труда, молчаливого спутника ночи, друга Авроры золотой, друга пенатов святых?
Written on a sleepless night. I can't sleep, though it's not light. My room is full of darkness and tiresome slumber. Only the monotonous tick-tock of the clock. The three fates babbling like old women. The fluttering of sleeping night. The mouse-like scurrying of life. Why are you troubling me? What's your meaning, boring whisper? Reproach or grumbling by my wasted day? What is it you want from me? Do you call to me or prophesy? I want to understand you. I'm seeking sense in you.
Стихи, сочиненные ночью во время бессонницы. Мне не спится, нет огня, всюду мрак и сон докучный, ход часов лишь однозвучный раздается близ меня. Парки бабье лепетанье, спящей ночи трепетанье, жизни мышья беготня. Что тревожишь ты меня? Что ты значишь, скучный шепот? Укоризна или ропот мной утраченного дня? От меня чего ты хочешь? Ты зовешь или пророчишь? Я понять тебя хочу. Смысла я в тебе ищу.
Bound for your distant homeland. Bound for your distant homeland, you left an alien shore. I wept that hour before you, and I could weep no more. I did my best to hold you, in pleading hands grown chill. The torment of our parting, I strove to hold it still. But from that cruel embracing, you tore your lips away, bid me from my dark exile to your resplendent day. We'll meet, you promised, under a sky forever blue. In olive's shade, my darling, we'll kiss there and be true. But where the arch of heaven shines a brilliant blue, where olives shade the waters, at last there's rest for you. Your beauty and your suffering are sealed forevermore. With them, the kiss of greeting you kept me waiting for.
Для берегов отчизны дальной ты покидала край чужой. В час незабвенный, час печальный, я долго плакал пред тобой. Мои хладеющие руки тебя старались удержать. Томленье страшного разлуки мой стон молил не прерывать. Но ты от горького лобзанья свои уста оторвала. Из края мрачного изгнанья ты в край иной меня звала. Ты говорила: в день свидания под небом вечно голубым, в тени олив, любви лобзанья мы вновь, мой друг, соединим. Но там, увы, где небо своды сияют в блеске голубом, где тень олив легла на воды, заснула ты последним сном. Твоя краса, твои страдания исчезли в урне гробовой, а с ними поцелуй свидания. Но жду его, он за тобой.
We're next going to read Pushkin's Я здесь и Nezilia. Here I am in Azilia. But first I'll read an extract from a poem by Barry Cornwall on the same subject. In Azilia, I am here. Thy own cavalier is now beneath thy lattice playing. Why art thou delaying? He hath ridden many a mile, but to see thy smile. The young light on the flowers is shining, yet he is repining.
Here I am in Azilia, in front of your window. The whole of Sevilla is dark and in slumber. Here, full of high daring and close to the eyebrows, with my strings and my rapier in front of your window. Asleep to the sound of my rousing guitar? If your husband comes down, he'll die by this sword. Hang out a silk cord from that window of yours. Why so slow, being adored by a rival of mine? Here I am in Isilia, in front of your window. The whole of Sevilla is dark and in slumber.
Я здесь, Инезилья, я здесь, под окном, объята Севилья и мраком, и сном, исполнен отвагой, окутан плащом, с гитарой и шпагой я здесь, под окном. Ты спишь ли? Гитарой тебя разбужу. Проснется ли старый, мечом уложу. Шелковые петли к окошку привесь. Что медлишь? Уж нет ли соперника здесь? Я здесь, Инезилья, я здесь, под окном. Объята Севилья и мраком, и сном.
From the feast during the plague, Mary's song. Mary sings. Once in this our country, peace and plenty ruled. Once upon a Sunday, Holy Church was filled. From the crowded schoolhouse, children's voices pealed. Busy scythe and sickle sparkled in the field. Church is now forsaken. Schoolhouse all forlorn. Darkling groves are empty. Wasted is the corn. Like a burnt out building stands each street of doom. All is still and silent, save the swelling tomb. Always dead are carried. Groans of those that live, peace to the departed, call on God to give. Always room is needed. Graves of fresh interred draw their ranks together like some frightened herd. Should my spring be destined early for the grave, you whom I have loved so, all the joy life gave, pray shun Jenny's body. Do not come too near those dead lips, but follow from afar the bier. Go then from this village, find some resting place where your soul's affliction may be granted grace. When the plague is over, visit my poor dust. Edmund, know in heaven, Jenny will keep trust.
Пир во время чумы. Песни Мэри. Было время, процветала в мире наша сторона. В воскресенье бывала Церковь Божия полна. Наших деток в шумной школе раздавались голоса, и сверкали в светлом поле серп и быстрая коса. Ныне церковь опустела, школа глухо заперта, нива праздно перезрела, роща темная пуста, и селенье, как жилище погорелое, стоит. Тихо все, одно кладбище не пустеет, не молчит. Поминутно мертвых носят, и стенания живых боязливо Бога просят упокоить души их. Поминутно место надо, и могилы меж собой, как испуганное стадо, жмутся тесной чередой. Если ранняя могила суждена моей весне, ты, кого я так любила, чья любовь отрада мне, я молю, не приближайся к телу Дженни ты своей, уст умерших не касайся, следуй издали за ней. И потом оставь селенье, уходи куда-нибудь, где б ты мог души мученье усладить и отдохнуть. И когда зараза минет, посети мой бедный прах. А Эдмонда не покинет Дженни даже в небесах.
Master of the Revel song from the feast during the plague. Master of the Revels sings. When great winter he throws at his bitterest foes shaggy legions of frost, ice, and snow, we meet them with feasting's glad glow. The Black Queen with her hosts, a rich harvest she boasts. Her dread spade taps our door night and day. What can we do now but pray? Let us shut out the plague, like the winter's rampage. We'll carouse and our goblets will drain to the plague's universal reign. There's a savage delight in the thick of the fight, the chasm, the ocean's dark rage, the whirlwind, the smell of the plague. In what threatens with death our mortal breath, should we make its discovery, there is joy, immortality. To the plague then, all praise, she'll not darken our days. Let us drink while the cup overflows of the breath of the Maid of the Rose.
Пир во время чумы. Председатель поет. Когда могущая зима, как бодрый вождь ведет сама на нас косматые дружины своих морозов и снегов, навстречу ей трещат камины и весел зимний жар пиров. Царица грозная чума теперь идет на нас сама и льстится жатвою богатой, и к нам в окошко день и ночь стучит могильною лопатой. Что делать нам и чем помочь? Как от проказницы зимы запремся также от чумы. Зажжем огни, нальем бокалы, утопим весело умы и, заварив пиры да балы, восславим царствие чумы. Есть упоение в бою и бездны мрачной на краю, и в разъяренном океане средь грозных волн и бурной тьмы, и в аравийском урагане, и в дуновении чумы. Все, что гибелью грозит, для сердца смертного таит неизъяснимые наслаждения. Бессмертия может быть залог, и счастлив тот, кто средь волнения их обретать и ведать мог. Итак, хвала тебе, чума, нам не страшна могилы тьма, нас не смутит твое призвание. Бокалы пеним дружно мы, и девы розы пьем дыхание, быть может, полное чумы.
Elegy. The madcap years have long since gone to waste. They hang upon me like a drunken haze. Meanwhile, inside me, sadness from the past grows in strength like wine with lengthening days. The course that I must take will offer me troubles and toils and a tormented sea. But I have no desire, dear friends, to die. I wish to live, to suffer, and to think. I know that griefs and cares will burden me, but pleasures also life will surely bring. I shall again drink in sweet harmony. The mind's creations will not cease to wring warm tears from me, and on my sad decline, perhaps one day, love's farewell smile will shine.
Элегия. Безумных лет, угасшее веселье, мне тяжело, как смутное похмелье. Но как вино, печаль минувших дней в моей душе чем старе, тем сильней. Мой путь уныл, сулит мне труд и горе грядущего волнуемое море. Но не хочу, о други, умирать. Я жить хочу, чтоб мыслить и страдать. И ведаю, мне будут наслаждения меж горестей, забот и треволнения. Порой опять гармонией упьюсь, над вымыслом слезами обольюсь. И, может быть, на мой закат печальный блеснет любовь улыбкою прощальной. David.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That brings to a conclusion our recital in celebration of the Boldinger Autumn.